Did you know that our brain only processes part of what it encounters? The brain takes the important pieces of information and it chunks it into our long-term memory. But what about the other pieces of information? If they become important in the future, then the brain will catalog and add that to its memory also. This results in a mental model, and as we get older, this mental model becomes more refined. So if you were to look at a 5-year-old Dr. Bob and ask, "What is a scientist?" he might reply by saying that it's somebody that wears a lab coat and works with test tubes. And that would be about it for a 5-year-old's mental model of a scientist. But if you were to ask me today what my mental model is of a scientist, it'd be much more dynamic. It would encompass all forms of scientist. As we grow older, our mental model becomes more refined. Here's another example. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and she has a mental image of what Grandpa looks like. Grandpa to her has glasses, gray hair, and a beard. So here's a true story. We were once at a grocery store, and she ran up to somebody with gray hair, glasses, and a beard, and gave them a huge hug. It didn't take long for her to realize that this wasn't her grandpa. But her mental model of grandpa is very limited, and every time she has a new grandpa experience, she builds more and more of what grandpa is, and sometimes more importantly, what grandpa isn't. The same thing happens with flavors. We start to build impressions at a very early age because our culture really teaches us flavor preference and flavor understanding. I have a colleague in the UK who had never experienced root beer before. And so when he came to visit the States, we went out to lunch and he decided to try it. He had never had it before, and when he went to take a sip of it, he immediately spit it out. And his next phrase puzzled me a little bit. Why would Americans drink something that tastes like a rugby locker room? You're probably asking yourself, a rugby locker room? What does that have to do with root beer? How are they connected? And furthermore, what does a rugby locker room even taste like? So I went back and did some research. It turns out that one of the characterizing chemicals in root beer is methyl salicylate. It's also known as oil of wintergreen. And oil of wintergreen has this unique property of cooling when you put it onto the skin. And so I called my colleague up and asked him a little bit more about that rugby locker room. And he had mentioned that in a rugby locker room, players would put these hot, cool liniments onto their skin to warm up their muscles. And at that moment in time, I had an aha experience. So that's where they're getting their taste like a rugby locker room from. And that's how we refine our mental models. We enter into the world with very basic likes and dislikes on our sense of taste and on our sense of smell. And as our culture teaches us new experiences, positive or negative, we begin to change what we like or dislike.